I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
You know what Spotify said my listening age was?
Go on. What's your listening age on Spotify?
82. Or maybe 84, one of those. But I've always said my spirit animal is a grandma. I have said this since I was in my 20s, dude. So finally, somebody has seen me.
I got 21.
I know. You really want to be one of these like kids, don't you?
It's true, though. I'm just down with the kids.
You're just down with the kids.
Yeah,
well, don't they say what the
noise.
helly? Oh my gosh, we sound so old.
Probably.
Well, Tobias, I was skimming over the show notes, and I see that you're here to talk about possibly the greatest democracy on the planet, the most prestigious exemplary model of democracy globally. So I'm very happy.
I mean, unfortunately, you're wrong, because in this week's episode, I'm not mentioning English parliamentary democracy. So you must have been looking at previous show notes. No, I want to talk to you about another episode that shows your country in a really positive light and the interface of crypto-backed capitalism with the need for prediction and speed and responsiveness and your country's investment in global conflict.
I don't like this at all. Wait, are we no longer making decisions about things with based on an octopus or something?
I mean, this is somewhat more consequential and involving crypto and Trump Jr. and all sorts of horrible
This
things.
sounds sad and serious. Continue.
So on November 15th, which is about 2 weeks ago as we're recording, at about 10:48 UTC, a live map from the Institute for the Study of War was edited to show a fake Russian advance on the city of Minograd, slightly west of Donetsk, in Ukraine.
Wait, they manipulated a map.
A false edit was made to a map.
False edit. Okay.
And it exposes the relationship between a sort of new type of predictive modeling that's occurring, which is basically a form of crowdsourcing, but is incentivized by finance and profit, and the increasing use of open source intelligence and things like that. So are you familiar with the Institute for the Study of War at all?
No.
They are, by all accounts and from what I could read, a pretty harmless institution. They emerged in about 2008 in response to stagnation in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. The theory being that if they could start to work with what's called OSINT, open source intelligence. So in other words, things people are posting on social media, reports from the ground, stuff that people are saying in the press, et cetera, and group that stuff together, they could start to build more accurate maps of what was actually happening on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan for the benefit of journalists, analysts, and even military planners. All their stuff is, as far as we know, released open source. They don't consult directly. And their initial audience actually was military contractors who felt that the US government's and US military's maps and intelligence were dating too quickly and weren't accurate and so on and so forth. So they started doing that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've been mapping conflicts ever since, not all of them, but selectively, and they've been mapping the Ukraine conflict. They have a live map, which is edited every few hours, and every day they release a kind of report of any major changes. And so on November 15th, this edit was made, which showed a fake Russian advance. So Russia didn't make this advance, but it showed this advance on the city of Minograd. But the edit suspiciously coincided with a simultaneous payout of about $1 million on an online prediction market called Polymarket, which is a place where anonymous gamblers meet to bet on anything and everything.
Wow.
To use our catchphrase, spell up, Bubba. Whatever it is.
Buckle up, Bubba. Oh my God. Okay. Continue.
So this battle has been going on for weeks. The picture of the Ukraine conflict is one of stagnation, but Russia making very, very slow advance west into Ukraine. The battle's been going on for weeks, at least since September, when, and I'll get to how this works in a second, when the bet that Russia would take Minograd first appeared on Polymarket. And over that time, it accrued about $1 million in bets. And basically what happens is that people open up the question, and the question was, will Russia capture Minograd by ... And then people throw in a bunch of dates. So they say September 29th, October 15th, November 1st, November 15th, and then December 31st, and various other dates. And one of these dates was November 15th. The date of November 15th had $200,000 itself riding on it. But the bet also includes every day afterwards. So in total, about $700,000 was riding on all the dates up to the end of the year. So almost $1 million cashed out. Now, the terms of the bet were, this market will resolve to yes if, according to the ISW map, Russia captures the intersection between, pardon my Ukrainian, Vatatina Volyetsia and Puchachova Volyetsia, located in Minograd. And this was reported by 404 Media, who are a lovely kind of tech-critical outfit. They said just before one of the bets was resolved, someone at the ISW edited its map to show that Russia had advanced through the intersection, so this is a crossroads in the center of the town, and taken control of it. After the market had resolved and everyone's been paid out, the red shading on the map vanished, suggesting someone at the ISW with editing permissions on the map had tweaked it ahead of the market resolving. So anyone could submit info to the ISW, but the ISW have pretty strict verification controls, and where they can't verify something, they cite all the sources and say, we can't confirm this, but this is, we believe this strong reporting. So it means that either someone at the ISW was complicit in making this edit, knowing it was false, or evidence was fabricated that was convincing enough for the ISW to say, oh, okay, Russia has taken the center of Leningrad. We don't know. So the ISW quite immediately rolled back the edit and have not really said much about what happened. I'm sure they're doing some internal investigation.
Okay, super interesting. Also kind of weird that it's falling between, at least in the US, it falls right after midterm elections and right before the Thanksgiving holiday.
Is that when people in the US get particularly reticent with evidence and they're just like, nah, we'll just wing it?
I mean, everyone has, they're what is it called? Food coma. So
have you heard of Polymarket? Are you familiar with Polymarket?
Of course not, Tobias. Tell me more.
While the ISW, I think, is quite legit, they're described as slightly hawkish.
Described by who was slightly hawkish?
They were described by NPR. So
Incredible.
The most middle-of-the-road
moderate
broadcaster described it as the most middle-of-the-road military mapping company.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
I'll take it.
In the Dungeons and Dragons grid.
Oh, God.
Neutral. Bang in the middle.
I'm glad you got that one. You got that one off. You just had to, didn't you?
So the ISW quite legit. Polymarket couldn't be further from it. It's another innovation in which America comes off quite poorly, I have to say.
Surprise, surprise. Continue.
So cryptocurrency-based betting platform founded in 2020 in the city of New York by Shane Copland, who at 28 is the world's youngest billionaire. It was restricted in 2022 for unregistered derivatives trading by your country's former president, Joseph Biden. It will shock you to learn that in 2025, Donald Trump eased regulation on
I'm
Polymarket.
sure. For all his billionaire friends? What a shocker.
And by utter coincidence, his son, Donald Trump Jr., ended up on the
No
board.
way. You don't say. Congratulations. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and also another shocking coincidence, at that point, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission strangely just dropped its probe into illegal activity at Polymarket. So Polymarket's been active for a few years, and actually its biggest and most active bet was US election 2024. People put down $3.3 billion on the outcome of the US election, with one winner, the French whale, pseudonymic, obviously, I don't think it's Mr. Whale, F.
Okay.
The French whale winning $85 million on the correct prediction of Donald Trump.
Wow. Maybe I need to get into crypto gambling.
Well, these things are relatively new, right? These prediction markets. Yeah. There's a couple of them. So there's Polymarket. Kalshi is the other big one. Robinhood, which has been in the news for a few years as a retail investor, has also said that prediction markets are their fastest growing product.
Yeah.
And the way it works, as I said earlier with Polymarket, is that basically you or I could go online right now on Polymarket and say, what is the chance that Taylor Swift trips up over her dress at a concert and breaks her knee? And we say, I bet $100 on it. And people would pile in. So that's the scheme of it. They were worth over $3 billion in 2025. So in 2025 alone, about $3 billion was put down on Polymarket and on other prediction markets, which is 5 times the value of 2024. But Forbes predicts that the value of prediction markets could be $100 billion by 2035. And to quote the estimable Forbes, they would be used for anticipating everything from elections to shutdowns to Taylor Swift and LeBron James. What don't they touch? And unlike traditional bookies, these sites don't take a cut. They just facilitate the bets between users. What they do is they take 2% of any winning bets.
I was going to ask, how do they generate any profit. It's like the court of public opinion. This is a little weird, man. I don't like this. This feels yucky.
It does feel yucky, doesn't it? Does it
Yeah,
make you feel a bit
it feels
icky?
yucky.
Yeah,
It does.
yeah.
It does.
Again, another innovation that doesn't show America in its best light. Anyway, as you might imagine on these sites, conflict and war are major subjects. One of the biggest bets at the moment is, will there be a Russian-Ukraine ceasefire in 2025, which currently has a 5% chance to end by the end of the year.
By like December 31st?
By December 31st, exactly so.
Okay.
Yeah, $46 million riding on it.
Who can bet on this? Is it like anyone across the globe who has access to the platform?
Yeah, literally anybody who has
Wow.
access to the platform and some crypto.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, you said something really insightful, actually, Rada, and I mean that.
Well, that might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
I don't expect any more of it.
Ugh.
You said it's a little bit like the court of public opinion. So this is starting to have a reverse effect on the way that policymakers might go about making decisions. What might this mean to have these markets for using public thinking, let's say, public opinion, mass public opinion, to predict future events? Is the information from 500 crypto strangers betting on a platform about a ceasefire more accurate than the best military intelligence? Remember why the Institute for the Study of War was founded, because the military intelligence wasn't good enough and they wanted to source it from, at the time, what was available in social media and public forums and things like that. Reading the Forbes article, the Forbes reported speaking with leaders. Forbes likes to say they speak with leaders. I don't think they really speak with leaders.
We're leaders. What does that even mean?
Yeah, didn't phone me up. Forbes reports
How dare they?
leaders find the breadth and speed of prediction market dashboards more responsive than their usual sources when they're looking at sort of global affairs. Think about it. Official data can be fragmented and partial. So another example, Trump refused to publish the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which at the time made news over here because it's seen as a sort of global economic bellwether. Even in that situation or without that situation, these leaders believe that prediction markets provide real-time forecasting that is faster and more accurate because of its crowdsourced nature. So there's also this idea that institutions can be partial. Even dare I say, if I were to besmirch his good name, even the Donald Trump administration might be considered partial. And so they might want to find statistics about the state of the global economy or global affairs from elsewhere. And it might shock you to know that this has happened before. I mentioned the Trump election, and there was a little bit of a controversy there. So the Wall Street Journal did an investigation about this amount of money going down on the 2024 election. There were 4 individual bettors who were each putting down around $30 million on a Trump victory. And every time the polls went the other way, they would double down. So if there was a poll published that morning saying, it's looking like a Kamala victory or a Biden victory, they would double down. They would put more money on Trump, and that would of course then affect the market, and it forced the odds up to 60% on Polymarket a Trump victory. And so the Wall Street Journal did an investigation that did it actually influence election outcomes? Were people, because they were seeing people saying Trump was going to be elected, were they actually then inclined to either not turn up at the polls because they were just convinced that Kamala wasn't ever going to make it, or indeed to say, well, I better get on the winning side and go and vote for Trump for the sake of winning this bet if they had money on it, indeed. So Wall Street Journal said, it's spurious. It's not necessarily a connection, but it was definitely notable. And those 4 big characters had their bets were very carefully timed with negative ratings for Trump, and they seemed very coordinated. They were all going at the same time. But also not the first time, even in recent history. So another US innovation that once again doesn't show your country in the best light.
Imagine that.
What is a great American innovation?
Kraft singles. Cheese. That's not really cheese. The sterilization of white bread.
Anyway, another great US innovation was the policy analysis market in 2007. So this was a proposed futures exchange on Middle East events created by DARPA. I'm sure you've heard of DARPA. Defense and Advanced Research Projects
Agency,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so similar to what the Institute of War Studies were looking at, which is the Middle East is messy and complicated, and we don't really understand what's going on, but there's a lot of open intelligence being generated on the ground. The theory from John Poindexter, who at the time was at the head of the information office at DARPA, was that the invisible hand of the market would somehow give them more accurate information about the progress of events, future progress of events in the Middle East, and they could use this sort of invisible hand, crowdsourced wisdom of the crowds thing as a way of making policy decisions. If people genuinely felt that something was going to happen, and they had this open source intelligence available to them, and thousands of people saying it's going to go this way, that could influence US military policy. And the US, I'll have to say this, was in a better place at the time, like ethically and morally.
We were. I remember that time.
Not great.
Listen, I mean, I don't think that you can ever have like a completely clean politician or a completely kind of, clean politics, but we felt okay going out into the world and saying we were American.
Anyway, the policy analysis market proposed by DARPA was met with abject horror by your politicians, which is good, and never got off the ground. There's a great, amazing letter from Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Brian Dorgan of North Dakota, and they released an open letter to Poindexter, the information officer of DARPA, which labeled it as a terror and assassination market. Wyden said, "The idea of a federal betting parlor on atrocities and terrorism is ridiculous as it is grotesque." Dorgan called it useless, offensive, and unbelievably stupid, which is just like the best.
We've
put down
seen
of the
this
DARPA
science
project.
fiction film somewhere before, haven't we?
I couldn't find any images of it, but it's a description of it on the website as a backdrop to bold text with faint background sample screens in a small house. Poindexter had included as colourful examples of miscellaneous items such as the assassination of Yasser Arafat, a missile attack by North Korea, and the overthrow of the King of Jordan. And these were part of the demo.
This is wild. This is wild that there's like even the consideration to, I don't know, gamify things that feel so significant, so important, so I don't know, dude. This is yucky. I don't like this.
It is yucky. I think, to quote Dorgan, and this is a quote I'll be using a lot over the next few weeks, useless, offensive, and unbelievably stupid.
But like, who was in the room saying like, this is a great idea? I mean, to what?
Well, John
like,
Poindexter was, and he resigned
Jesus
by the end of the week. And by the way, John Poindexter, I didn't have time to go through his whole Wikipedia page, but there were quite a few subtitles there which were labeled firing, resignation.
No way. This is like every sci-fi horror game where like humanity has lost their soul.
Completely.
Is it?
Completely.
Yeah.
I think there's something that will constantly be alluring about this idea of like being able to crowdsource high risk intelligence such that there is the theory that it could be better somehow than let's call it expert intelligence, but also that it kind of socializes the risk. It's like, it's not me. This was what the wisdom of the crowd said. This is the court of public opinion.
But doesn't it also kind of desensitize us to what is actually happening, right? Because you're talking about the lives of human beings. And I think like to turn it into something where it's like a game is just horrific, right? One thing I will say is like something that this does remind me of is I remember, as you know, in California, we have earthquakes. And now there's like lots of bots on Twitter and other social media applications that will tell you they're kind of hooked up to like seismic readers, right? But back in the day, I remember thinking, if you want to know whether an earthquake has happened, just go to Twitter, because most people would pop up and be like, was that an earthquake? Did you guys feel that? And you'd also kind of get a sense of like maybe where the epicenter was, because there were so many more people in that location. So like, to me, it's instances like that where it potentially becomes useful to kind of crowdsource, access to information. But it's when it's like this, where it's just manipulative and it is belittling to just the human life, I think is just really sad.
Yeah, yes, totally. And there are thankfully as many great examples of people using these sorts of platforms for disaster resilience and ensuring people of information, as there are, people trying to monetize death, which is essentially what all of these things are. They are incentivizing conflict.
Speaking of just disaster relief, there is this amazing group that I learned about when I was in Dubai, actually. This woman named Nasheen Matani. She runs this organization called Disaster Map Foundation, and they use open source software for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. So I think like there are examples here that feel quite hopeful and feel like, good things can come of it. But yeah, let's continue down this pathway of doom and gloom and see what happens.
Well, I would love to continue to tar the US with this brush, but to my shame, all of this probably did start with the English.
I'm sure it did, as always.
Yeah.
As everything does.
I had a quick dig around for relationships between gambling and warfare, and one of the earliest examples I could find was during the 9 Years' War, 1690s. Not worth going into the conflict of why everyone went to war with France over something that happened in Ireland. But anyway, England needed to raise about £5 million, which is about £600 million in today's dinero. And they gave out lottery tickets, basically, where winners would get a lifelong stipend. Which in 1690 isn't bad. You're not going to turn your nose up at a lifelong stipend.
Yeah.
And they raised enough money to continue a war with the French. It was copied by the French in 1710. They thought, this looks like a great idea. We will do this as well.
Don't do that.
And then US tax evaders tried to use it in 1776. Poorly, they needed to raise $1.5 million to fund their ragtag bag of tax evading rebels.
You're talking about the founding fathers. Is that who you're referring to?
Yeah, big C conservative tax evaders who didn't like liberal politicians in England, yeah. But their sheer corruption and incompetence meant it only raised about $100,000 of the $1.5 million they needed to raise. So there were various lotteries going on for ages where people were sort of, basically saying, put in some money to help us fund our war and you'll get something back in return. Most famously, perhaps, have you heard of Lloyd's of London?
Faintly. Tell me more, though, please. Yeah.
Lloyd's of London is really fascinating. I think it's pretty, as an institution, it's quite unique. It is a insurance market. So it's not an insurance company. It's a site of insurance where insurance brokers go to trade insurance. And it trades in hundreds of billions of dollars. People basically betting on bad outcomes. Started in the 1680s, so similar period to the 9 Years' War, in a coffee shop on Tower Street in the city of London. And it started there because it was basically the place people went to hear news about shipping. So if you had invested in a boat going out into Europe or out to America, you went to this pub in Tower Street to hear the best intelligence and the best news about what might have happened to your ship, or if there was, pirates somewhere or whatever it was. And over time, they basically managed to build this pretty robust network of intelligence. And that got to the point where in the 1730s, they started publishing Lloyd's List, which was a daily update on what was going on in shipping. So keeping track of all the news in shipping. No surprise, deeply embedded in the slave trade, which was obviously where the money was for a lot of these people in ships at the time. But as well as being a site where people would take out insurance on their ships, it was also a place where people would put down things like bets on the deaths of famous people. I think the King of Sweden's going to keel over on Wednesday or whatever they were going to say. So, and it still basically serves that function today. So you're sending carrier around the world full of, Labubu's or something. You go to Lloyd's, they look at, all the reports of piracy, all the reports of like sabotage and everything else. And they say, okay, this is how much it's going to cost you to ensure that crate of Labubu's from being taken by pirates or whatever it is.
Do you have Labubu's? Is that
No, I'm not even sure what Labubu's are. The difference is, though, as opposed to something like Polymarket, is that the insurance companies are incentivized to reduce risk because they don't want to pay out. They don't want the pirates to attack. They don't want people to get assassinated or killed. They don't want to have to pay out for theft or death or accident or loss or anything like that. Exactly. They don't want to pay out for Labubu's. They're going to try and use their intelligence to reduce risk, not to encourage risk and conflict by which then people could bet and make money, which is essentially what Polymarket does. But now we're in this new age where information is fragile. It's also super open, much more available. Polymarket and their ilk see an opportunity there to crowdsource intelligence into making bets. And now we start to see people making potentially policy decisions on the idea that information is somehow richer and better than expert information. The absolute worst end of this, the absolute most banal, I want to use Mr. Dorgan's phrase again, the most useless, offensive, and unbelievably stupid thing is an app called Polyglobe. And Polyglobe is basically a layer on top of Polymarket. It's made by someone else, but it sits on top of Polymarket using the API for Polymarket that visualizes real-time conflicts on real-time interactive maps and allows people to bet on them. So you're literally like scrolling around a map of the globe, and if you look at the interface, it is designed to look exactly like a stock market screen. It's got those kind of dark colors, it's got the sort of tickers, it's got all the red and green and yellow and things like that. So all those colors and design vernacular are there, but it's literally a map of people being killed.
Are people just bored of watching Call of Duty players on Twitch? Is that what's happening right now? What is going on?
Polyglobe uses maps from an organization called Deep State Live, which, despite their name, are one of the good guys. Deep State Live are another open source mapping platform which were set up to help Ukrainians understand where the conflict was, so they could keep themselves safe. And they're fucking furious, as you might imagine, that their mapping service is now being used to bet on the deaths of Ukrainians.
That is horrendous.
So, here's what Polyglobe says. Now, when you hover over a market, we draw the exact area of operation it resolves on. So they describe conflict zones as market. It spells out the rules in plain English. No more rule debates, no more guessing what actually settles, the only way to monitor the situation. So yeah, pretty grotesque misuse
That's
of
grim.
a humanitarian tool
That
for profit.
is grim.
The thing that worries DeepState.live, which is a group of open source, activists and stuff who are building these things, is that it undermines the trust in their platform. If these things can be manipulated and the manipulation can be incentivized for profit, then if you're trying to help people escape conflict, how can people know to trust you?
I can imagine a world like in the worst of worlds where it's not even about conflict, it's about the impacts of climate change and natural disaster. So one of the apps here that was probably the most referenced during the LA fires in January 2025 of this year was Watch Duty. And that was a completely open source app. And I could imagine, like, what if that data is leveraged and people are sitting there going, oh, I'm going to bet that Altadena is going to burn next, or this place is going to burn next, or stuff like that, instead of what we used it for, which was, do we need to evacuate or not? Right.
And imagine if a member of the fire brigade or their family has money.
That's right. Can you imagine that? Yeah. It completely breeds distrust in this wider system that is meant to keep us potentially safe.
This is the creation of fake mapping data to either manipulate policy to make money at the cost of people's lives, and it's kind of unforgivable. And so let's think about this in futures and foresight's terms. There is an incentive for, let's say, leaders of all sorts, whether they're business leaders or government leaders, to think this information that's being crowdsourced, where it's incentivized by money, so people are incentivized to supply information and get it right because they'll profit if they're right.
Because they have some skin in the game.
Whereas institutions, even like the Institute for the Study of War, might be considered slower, more fallible, or indeed, in the case of the Bureau for Labor Statistics, it's just not trustworthy anymore. So can you, in a time of great uncertainty, trust this crowdsourced incentivized information even more? But it's so easily gamed, as
and manipulated in the worst of ways.
But it has attracted a global audience by those who see an opportunity to profit on betting on the state of that map, effectively.
I don't know if it starts to kind of seed a little bit of that distrust in like platforms in general.
Well, I'd say we're already there. Even Google Maps is not trustworthy because it labels things based on political pressure. That's already been demonstrated in the case of the Gulf of America or whatever it's now called.
Ugh.
I think what it tragically does is open up the other side, which is something you mentioned earlier, which is it creates such a distance and alienation from reality, such that the ability to get rich quick without really acknowledging that what you're really betting on is people's lives is just eminently feasible. And that is something completely Atwoodian. I think it might be Oryx and Crake. At the beginning of Oryx and Crake, there's literally two teenage boys like betting on strains on the internet, and they're just curiously disconnected from it as a process. It's interesting when you look at these platforms, the design of them is very deliberate. They are designed to look like financial platforms, and there's tickers and everything else is presented
no other
in a
narrative.
very financialized way. Yeah, there's no narrative of what's actually happening. It's all quite abstract and distorted. And I think, the piece that I think is really interesting for me is this idea that these prediction markets, if they're to grow at the rate that the estimable folks at Forbes, Mr. and Mrs. Forbes suggest.
Mr. and Mrs., I see.
Sorry, they, them, Forbes. My bad. We're talking about leaders, for whatever that is, according to Forbes, already starting to see these as the best source of information, the most live and rich source of information, these anonymous betting parlors on global information as being the place to go.
I don't like it. I have a very uneasy feeling about this.
But I think it throws all sorts of questions into there about what that then incentivizes.
And who does it incentivize?
What capex does the Trump administration say, I want a piece of that?
Oh, I'm sure those conversations are already happening.
We're going to take a big chunk of the CIA budget and give it to Polymarket instead, because that's going to give us better intelligence.
I would not be surprised if there was an executive order that came out in the next
it's almost definitely got bits of China and North Korea and stuff already in there.
100%.
Bits and bobs. Anyway, listen, this was pretty uncheery, and I'm sorry for that.
Thank you for bumming me out for the rest of the day. Well, this is one to keep an eye on. I'll say that. All right, my friend.
I'm sorry. Enjoy your day.
Happy Monday.
I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Doodles.